The minimum wage is hiked by city council, but business leaders object. Californians could vote on whether to break the Golden State into 6 smaller ones. Water restrictions are imposed as we grind through a third year of drought. And it's the 40th anniversary of Pride Week in San Diego. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, July 18th. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are reporter Dean Calbreth of the San Diego Daily Transcript, Randy Dotinga of Voice of San Diego, KPBS reporter Susan Murphy, and Tom Sensi, reporter with The Advocate. Well, City Council members had a choice: have voters decide whether to raise San Diego's minimum wage or raise it themselves. The council this week did it themselves, and they passed an ordinance which was a compromise from Council President Todd Gloria's original proposal. Now here's Todd Gloria, the council president, announcing that change.
San Diegans earning minimum wage will secure about $1,400 more per year thanks to the council's action yesterday. This translates into an additional $260 million a year into the pockets of low-income San Diegans, which they will then in turn spend on necessities like food, shelter, and clothing, which will help benefit our local economy.
All right, Dean, let's start with the details of this. What exactly did they raise and over what period of time?
Well, this is over a 3-year period. They're raising the minimum wage up to $11.75. It's currently, at the state, it's currently $9.
And that just turned over first of this month.
That just turned over on the first, went from $8 to $9. In San Diego, it's now scheduled to go to $9.75 in January, $10.75 the next January, and then $11.75. After that, it'll be inflation adjusted. Mm-hmm. So this is down from his original goal, which was going to be $13.09. Mm-hmm. But it's still a significant increase, I guess, for people who actually employ minimum wage workers. Now, there's a pretty classic split on the council on who's behind this and who's against it. Yeah, right? It's definitely a partisan split. The 4 Democrats, the 6 Democrats are in favor of it. The 3 Republicans are against it. And the key number is that 6 number. It's enough to override a potential veto from the mayor's office. And so Mayor Faulkner may veto this yet, but it won't matter because they've got the votes to override. It won't matter. Yeah, until November, we don't know what's going to happen in the November election. Until November, the Democrats have a unbreakable hold on the council. So as we said at the top, they wrestle with the idea of just doing it as an ordinance on their own, putting it to a vote. How did they wind up just doing it as an ordinance? I think, initially when Todd Gloria introduced it, he I think, envisioned it as being a ballot referendum. I think when council members started seeing the Chamber of Commerce and the shipyards get involved in referendums to overturn the Barrio Logan rezoning or to take a stand against the linkage fee, which had a semi-compromise this week, then they got a little skittish of these, heavily funded ballot proposition fights, and instead they decided to go forward and do it on their own. And so who is against it now, besides the 3 Republicans on the council? The Chamber of Commerce, the California Restaurant Association, which is based here, a number of healthcare groups, private home-related healthcare. They say this burden is going to fall onto the people onto the elderly who won't be able to afford their services anymore, et cetera. So there are some specific niches that are against it. It's interesting, a poll from the California Bank and Trust came out last month saying that 72% of businesses are in favor of it. They're either in favor or they think it'll be neutral, but that still leaves 30% who feel it would be negative. Well, that is kind of surprising. And some folks, business side folks, came to the council and supported it, did they not? Yeah, there's a business argument to make for it. It puts more hands into the money of the poor, who are more likely to spend it than the rich. The rich tend to put it into savings or something. These guys will immediately spend it and spend it locally instead of spending it on tickets abroad or something. So there's actually an economic development argument to make for it, and also also for the employer, it can reduce turnover, it can reduce the costs associated with retraining, constantly retraining workers. Instead, you give them a home where they're not going to quit, and you can save money that way.
Right. Susan?
I was going to say, I have a family member who's a store manager in San Diego, and he's actually heard some rumblings from some of his longer-term employees who were kind of that minimum wage level, but have worked very hard over the years to get those incremental 10-cent, 25-cent raises. Now they're going to be on the same level as newly employed minimum wage workers. And so I wonder how businesses will go about honoring.
Yeah, is an unforeseen consequence of this?
Well, I don't think it's an unforeseen one. I think it is foreseen that people, this is going to spark raises, of people who are not making the minimum wage now, or not even making the, who are already making more than $11.75, that they are going to be lifted. It's like the rising tide lifts all boat.
But that's not necessarily so. I mean, they may just be stuck at slightly above the minimum wage and then kind of resent these newcomers coming in at.
That's possible, but I think what's happened in other cities that have passed this and other states that have passed this is that in general wage levels rise at all low-paying wages.
Right. So, well, I mean, with any dramatic change like this, there may be some unforeseen consequences. But other cities have done this. I mean, there's some real-life examples of what the impact is.
Yeah, other cities have done it. California also has been raising its own wages. Other states are doing it. More than half the states have their own minimum wages now that are above the federal level, or more than half the population, 22 states. But there's some information out there that would suggest that this is a positive thing. The state of Washington has the highest minimum wage in the country. It also has the highest rate of business growth. So there's an argument that this really does help businesses in general.
Does boost things. We do mention here, got a few seconds left on this topic, but if these folks, the chamber and some of the business interests, if they wanted to block this, how would they go about it? It'd be 2016 until they could get to another ballot, you would think, right? You can't get to this one.
They will not be able to get to November. Yeah, it would be, conceivably, maybe they could call. I don't know the procedure for calling for a special ballot, but yes, it's going to be, it would be a while before they could get to the ballot. And in the meantime, January 1 is coming up. Yeah. Maybe they could get a stay on that if they do collect enough signatures. But there's a question. I think that they are facing questions of whether they're going to be able to do that and whether the public will support them on this.
Yeah, how do you get petitions to sign for that? All right, I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more reporting as we go along with that. So with more than 37 million people, 156,000 square miles of land area, California is undeniably a big place. And ever since we joined the Union back in 1850, there have been calls to break the big state apart, which all went nowhere, and now we might be voting on whether California should be shattered not into 2, but into 6 separate states. So explain for us, Randy, what's this proposal all about, the 6 states of California?
The idea is that we are too big. We're about 37, 38 million people, and there's also a perception that conservative Republican voices aren't being represented. And that's the big driver behind this.
Really democratically controlled state at this point.
It really is, and also not just in Sacramento, but also in Washington State in terms of senators. I mean Washington D.C.
Right.
And the idea is by cutting us up into 6 states, it would be more representative in terms of the conservatives, Republicans. According to one analysis by the Washington Post, 3 of these states, the new states, would be Democratic, and 3 states would be swing states, and they could go quite considerably go Republican. And under this proposal, there would be 6 states in California. There would be 55 states overall in the country, and we would have a lot more of a crowded U.S. flag. I think it's a very important factor to consider.
We certainly would. Yeah, the flag itself.
The design perspective, it just boggles the mind.
Yeah, and people are having all sorts of fun.
They really are.
Talking about this, editorial cartoons and essays and satirical things. We're having lots of fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, just at the very concept of it is pretty crazy. I mean, they have 6 states. They have the one state called Jefferson, which is just a few counties in Northern California that I think barely has a few 100,000 people.
Hasn't that been a movement sort of in and of itself, the Jefferson, the movement?
It really has. There's been talk about the northern parts of California and even some of Oregon splitting off and becoming their own state.
Seceding and more in common than anybody way down here from
right.
900 miles away.
Who down here could even name some of the counties north of Sacramento?
Right.
I mean, I know there's Humboldt and there's marijuana up there somewhere.
Somewhere, I've heard.
Well, there's this crazy in northeast California, this crazy area called the Modoc, and there's supposedly grizzly bears or Bigfoot.
Alpine County and all these counties that no one knows where they are. And
well, tell us about the fellow who's behind this now.
He's one of those unusual concepts, the technology mogul. He has a lot of money, and he's spent we hear $2 million on this project to get the petitions, which he has to have about 800,000 petitions.
And his name is?
Draper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's conservative.
He is conservative, and his idea is to put this on the ballot. If he has enough signatures, it could be on the ballot in 2016. And if it somehow passes, which seems unlikely, the likelihood is that nothing would happen, that this would never come about, that this is a completely impossible dream.
It would just sit there with the vote of the people. So Tim Draper, you think he's got to have what, nearly 1 million signatures, 800, 900,000?
Right. I mean, he's turned them in, but we have to see if they're valid. I mean, I haven't seen any petition drives down here on this measure, but maybe he's focusing on the more conservative parts of the state.
Okay, so voters pass this thing, and then Congress has to get involved.
Right. Well, there's a whole bunch of questions. Does the state legislature have to get involved? Oh. Do people who live in these various states have to approve that they want to be a state? What is Congress's role? Can the president veto it? Right. There are many questions. We've had a couple cases in the past where we have had states that have split. During the Civil War, Virginia split off West Virginia, and also Massachusetts split off Maine at some point. But these are like 150 years ago.
Right,
it was very unique situations, and we can look back to the beginning of the country. That whenever you get a new state, there's often a question of balance of slave state versus non-slave state in the beginning, and more recently, when you brought in Alaska and Hawaii, you brought in a Republican state and a Democratic state, and it kind of helped keep the status quo. Right. So the question is, would all these senators and all these Congress people want 5 new states that, I mean, it could end up that they're all Democratic. I mean, that with 3 Democratic states and 3 that are basically swing states, and we could end up with California having even more influence and more Democratic influence.
In the Senate.
Tom? In the Senate.
Well, we'd instead of 2 senators from California, we'd have probably maybe several.
You could have 12, 10 or 12 Democratic
from the Californias.
Yeah, so that's I don't know if Mr. Draper has quite thought that through. The worst case scenario here is you end up with even more Democratic influence in Washington.
One last question before we move on. One of these 6 states I read could be the poorest in the Union, Central California. Right?
Yeah, and that's the big question.
Central East.
We have a lot of areas of the state that are very rich that can in some ways subsidize the poor areas. But if you're suddenly a poor area, you're stuck. You can't rely on San Francisco or Silicon Valley or the tax base somewhere else
to support
you. So you could be in big trouble.
Well, we'll see how this goes as we move on to the ballot in 2016. And you'd think our 3rd year of drought here in California, we'd be flooded with messages to conserve water. But that really hasn't been the case, especially in San Diego, until this week. In fact, water use here is up slightly despite the exceedingly dry weather and emptying reservoirs. So, Susan, let's start with the new water restrictions. They were issued by the state, and what's the impact here in San Diego?
Well, our drought is deepening, and so water officials are getting tough on water regulations. This week, they approved measures to restrict mostly outdoor watering, so no more overwatering your lawn, decorative watering systems. You have to use recycled water. You can't hose down your driveways anymore. So they are getting tight, and the San Diego County Water Authority is expected to meet next week to comply with these regulations, and they are expected to activate their level 2 drought alert system.
Okay. But here we are, we sit in July. Wouldn't you think, it was no mystery even back in the winter with the snowpack. It wasn't raining, it wasn't snowing anywhere near what our average is, much less to recover from the last couple of years. Where have they been?
Well, they said that going into winter that our storage was fairly robust. In fact, I talked to the head of the Metropolitan Water District this week who said that temperatures, warm temperatures, they weren't anticipated. It's been very hot the last 6 months.
Boy, that terrible Santa Ana
in May alone, it was 7 degrees above average. Overall, from January through June, it's been 4 degrees above average. So when temperatures increase, so does water use. So the head of the Metropolitan Water District anticipates drawing down our storage 40% this year.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like a lot. I mean, that seems like we're betting the farm that we're going to get some snow and rain this winter.
Right. Well, our conditions hopefully will improve. But right now, we also get water from the Colorado River, so it's not completely dire. But at the end of this year, we could be left with about 1 year's worth of supply.
Okay. And San Diego has benefited, have we not, in recent years because some of these agreements kicked in. We're getting some more water that was going to agriculture east of us in the Imperial Valley.
We do have the Imperial Valley District water from the Colorado River. It's a water supply that's separate from Metropolitan, so we do have that added water supply, so that does give us some extra.
So there's some places elsewhere in the state that are in even more dire situation than San Diego is.
Yeah,
right
Northern California, they already have stricter mandates. Those are already in effect right now. So we're going to join those ranks.
Now, we've been through this before. A lot of us have lived here a number of years, and when you get into the severe restriction stuff, and it becomes a matter of enforcement. I mean, does the city and county have water police, or have we got neighbors turning in neighbors, whispering, hey, the guy down the street, he's watering at 1 in the afternoon. I mean, are we going to see some of that stuff?
It'll be interesting to watch. It'll be up to the local municipalities, water agencies to use this tool that the state of California has now given them, saying that this is a mandate, water conservation, and so it will be up to the local jurisdictions to implement the possible $500 fines and other
some teeth
regulations.
In it. There's a fine, right?
There is a $500 fine for those who don't comply with these new regulations that are set to go into effect on August 1st.
Now, you wonder in these situations, in the third year of a drought here, we're going to have a plant open. It's on time and on budget as far as I know, in Oceanside, a desalination plant coming. And of course, we all talked about recycling and toilet to tap. And does all that come up again as we get into water restrictions and the idea of the cost of that, and is it feasible, and are water rates getting high enough that desalination and some of these other infrastructure projects are worthwhile at this point?
Yeah, our desal plant is expected to come online, I believe, next year, so that will definitely give us an added benefit of more supply. But up until then, we're really going to have to tighten down our water supply use and start conserving.
Well, I remember in the last time when we got so restricted here, there's kind of an odd effect because people were pretty good at saving. I think it was 20% they were down, they were conserving. But the water district has all sorts of maintenance, upgrading, replacing pipes, projects going on that they have to fund, and they kind of count on a certain amount of revenue. So the more you save, the more expensive water gets.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting, these unintended consequences. I was interested in your report about San Vicente Dam being doubled in its height to increase its capacity. And I'm wondering, that kind of came out of nowhere from my awareness. And what about environmental impacts of some of these new infrastructure plans?
Yeah, so the dam was raised 117 feet, and that overall doubled the size of the reservoir. So now it will be about 2 to 5 years before that reservoir is filled to capacity, hopefully, depending on water demand and our water supply.
Hope we get some water, yeah.
Hope we get some of that wet stuff coming down on us.
Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned earlier from the Colorado River and some of the other sources we have. Of course, Lake Mead is down. We're reading stories in the national press, and we're very interested here. Lake Mead being to the east of us, and that's fed by the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, the Rockies, and through Lake Powell in the Colorado Grand Canyon River system here. What's happening with Lake Mead and Lake Powell?
Well, I know that the Colorado in general, the snowpack was a little bit above average this year, so that was good news because they've been in a 14-year drought. I know Lake Mead is expected to enter its lowest level in decades, several decades. And so that will, impact our supply as well in the coming years if things don't change.
Even though they had a pretty average snowpack, it wasn't so bad in the mountains to the east, in the Rockies and all this year.
Right.
All right, one last thing before we shift off this topic. Give us a little weather forecast. I know you stay on top of the El Nino. We're hoping that we get at least a moderate one here, and that can mean some more rain for us this year.
I actually just got off the phone before we came on here with the Western Regional Climate Center. So they were talking about the update in our drought, which had some bad news with it, that 90% of San Diego County is now under the extreme drought on our map. But in the fall, we are expected to have above average rainfall, is what he told me.
Okay, so that is encouraging.
So that is encouraging. Yes.
All right. Well, this weekend marks the 40th anniversary of what's now known as San Diego LGBT Pride. From a few dozen people in 1974 marching downtown, some hiding their faces, Pride has grown into what is perhaps the city's largest annual celebration. And Tom, you wrote this week that the growth in stature of Pride kind of parallels the equality here in San Diego and San Diego's reputation for being a place of equality.
Yeah, I was interested to learn when Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins came down for a ceremonial inauguration at the San Diego Club in Balboa Park last month. She was actually officially inaugurated in Sacramento. I asked her why she focused much more on the fact that she's the first San Diegan than she is the first lesbian to be elected Assembly Speaker. And she said, we've just become so used to that in San Diego. Members of the LGBT community have long been elected, long before San Diego kind of made a switch to a slightly more democratic-leaning city. When we were very much still a conservative Republican city, this city elected LGBT people. It saw past something that had nothing to do with their ability to take the reins of office. And I think we've come a very long way since 1974, when people did wear bags over their heads. Some people did in the
original celebration.
Yeah, I think they called it a march back then rather than a parade.
Yeah, it's interesting how in local elections, compared to national elections, how it's just not an issue, and how a number of Republicans are LGBT. Carl DeMaio or Bonnie Jimenez.
Sure, exactly.
Certainly notably. And it's happened very quickly in recent years, it seems. I think maybe there's been many watershed moments we could talk to, but former Mayor Sanders, when he kind of flipped in his attitudes, and of course his daughter came out and wound up getting married at one point.
Harvey Milk, the slain civil rights activist and first American politician to be elected as an openly gay man to public office, said, come out wherever you are. And what that really means is, Jerry Sanders, when we look back at the history of San Diego, we'll see that really was a watershed moment when he had to come to a point where he had to either love and accept his daughter for who she was, and kind of move on and evolve in his own outlook about equality. That was a watershed moment for this city. Jerry Sanders is a seminal figure in San Diego's history. He is a much-loved former mayor.
I was just going to say, also trying to change the National Republican Party by flying down to the convention and promoting
breaking with their platform on there. Yeah. I was going to ask you about some activists here now are kind of making the argument that San Diego is more aggressive in terms of embracing equality than even San Francisco.
Well, I wouldn't say that we're more aggressive in embracing equality. I think that in recent years we have had just a lot more firsts. Ironically, maybe paradoxically, the first street named after Harvey Milk is in San Diego, not San Francisco. The stamp campaign, there's a new, in May, a new United States postage stamp bearing the likeness of Harvey Milk was issued, and that national campaign started here in San Diego, as has, I don't know if you're aware of this, a campaign to have the U.S. Navy, the Secretary of the Navy, name the, I'm quoting, first appropriate ship, the USS Harvey Milk.
Really?
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah,
wow.
that campaign is happening, it's launched here.
San Diego is unique.
Really?
There are 2 cities in the country that have a city council district that is specifically drawn to serve the gay community. San Diego is one, Sacramento is the other. And that's in the whole country. We're one of only those 2. But the question is that we do have a gay district, like we have one that's mainly Hispanic and one that's mainly African American. I think the next question is, what does that matter if being a gay politician or being gay in public life is not an issue? Then do we still need a district that serves Hillcrest and that always has a gay person?
Yeah.
And
interesting point. Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, it just may not matter, which I guess is a good thing. In the few seconds we have left, tell us about the impact of Pride. I mean, it's become this huge annual event.
It is. I mean, I was at Horton Plaza yesterday, and I was surprised. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was to see a lot of decorations, rainbow-themed decorations throughout the mall. I was there at the gym, and it was everywhere.
So
and
a lot of broad support already.
It seems to almost, like Randy's saying, almost to be sort of a non-issue. However, we're not in a post-racial society just yet, and we're not in a post-LGBT
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. And that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Dean Calbreth of the San Diego Daily Transcript, Randy Dotinga, Voice of San Diego, Susan Murphy of KPBS News, and Tom Senzi of The Advocate. A reminder, all of the stories that we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.